Hello and welcome to the Recovery Matters podcast from CCAR, the podcast where putting recovery first is always the goal. Here we present interviews, discussions, stories, and speeches to cultivate the understanding and acceptance of the power, hope, and healing of recovery from alcohol and other addictions. Here are your hosts, Phil and Sandy Valentine.
You know, Phil, for 30 years now I've tried to dress you.
Why would you try to do that?
Because when I first met you, you wore outfits that were very matchy-matchy because you were working at the golf course.
That's true. I had like these, sans belt outfits with like pink pants and, a matching
striped
shirt.
Golfing shirts that match the pants perfectly.
Late 80s. Oh my goodness.
So I tried to get you to be a little edgier, but then that all fell apart, and now we've progressed over 30 years to what you have on today, which I shall describe for our listeners. You have a Hawaiian shirt featuring bunches of bananas.
Correct.
You have outdoor UV
hiking pants. Outdoor pants. Adventure pants.
You have socks with burgers and forks and knives. And then you have yellow Crocs that I've seen far too much of life.
These are my Appalachian Trail Crocs that I carried with me. And I wore them in camp. I didn't wear them to hike in. Well, there was one 10-mile stretch where I wore them. But, yeah, so.
So what is this thing happening today? Because normally you have some of this, but not the entire package.
I'm comfortable and I'm colorful.
You are colorful. I'm feeling pretty adventurous that I'm not wearing a black shirt and I'm wearing blue today.
Wow, honey.
I know.
Stretch yourself. Woo.
But we do not look as good as our guest.
Yeah.
Hi, Cathy.
Hi. How are you?
Good. You want to tell our listeners a little bit about you?
Sure. My name's Cathy Bergen. I'm a woman in long-term recovery, and I'm the center manager at the Manchester Recovery Community Center.
But wait a minute. So what do you think of my outfit?
Oh, gosh. You can speak truth in this room.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. It definitely draws attention to you, if that's what you were trying to do.
Well, no, I don't think I'm an attention seeker. It's not that funny. I think I like to just fill the world with a little color and be a little unusual. Would you say I'm unusual?
I would say you're right on the mark with that.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
So you said you're a person in long-term recovery. I like the way you said that. We like to ask our guests to talk about their childhood and what it was like growing up. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that?
Sure, I can talk about that.
Okay.
So I grew up in East Hartford, good old East Hartford, and we lived there. My parents still live there, actually. My mom lives there still. So, grew up in a little...
We were neighbors.
Were we?
Well, I was in Manchester.
Okay.
And Manchester and East Hartford people didn't usually like each other, did they? At least school-wise.
No, I think we were rivals. In some ways. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was a Penny High girl, though.
Oh, boy. A Manchester High girl. No, I was a guy.
Yeah.
What are you looking at me like that for?
Let's bring it back to Cathy.
Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry, Cathy.
That's okay. I just had an image that I get out of my head now. Okay, so I grew up in East Hartford. I have one sister. I'm the oldest, so I've always been people have called me bossy, opinionated, strong-willed, all of those things.
Even this high.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was always the one trying to direct all the other kids and all the activities, and if we played school, I was the teacher. If we played freeze tag or whatever, I was it. I was the person that sort of just directed everything. So from a very young age, I was that person, and
Today we call that leadership, Cathy, not bossy.
I was actually going to say that. I was going to say that if I had been a boy, I would have been, I feel like I probably would have been a leader. They would have said I was a strong leader, and I showed promise really early. But being a girl, I think I was labeled more as bossy and opinionated. So, but be that as it may, so I grew up, my dad was an alcoholic. Our whole family has been, I would say, decimated in a lot of ways by alcoholism. Both sets of grandparents, aunts, uncles, just cousins. It's just been, alcoholism has definitely run through both lines of our family and has caused a lot of pain, heartache, early deaths, all that stuff. So,
when did you become aware of, you said both sets of grandparents?
Yeah.
And how did you know that? Did you know that as a kid?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, so on my mom's side, my grandfather, I hate talking about it because it's such a traumatic thing, but she came home from school when she was 16 years old and found him. He had shot himself in the head.
Wow.
She found him. And because he was an alcoholic and suffered from depression and couldn't stop drinking. And that's what he chose to do.
Well, when you're talking about the generations, Don Koyas at White Bison has done a lot of work with being passed down through generations, and he says like 7 generations, and the recovery can break that cycle a lot of times of alcoholism. But to hear you, even though as a young person that was apparent in your lineage, let's say, is remarkable, because I have no idea if my grandparents were or not. Do you?
Nope.
Yeah. Anyway.
So that's my mom's side. So we always knew that he was an alcoholic. And on my dad's side, it was my grandfather and my stepmom, my step-grandmother, my dad's stepmom. They used to come and drink with my parents every weekend. So that was a lot of chaos as a kid with all of them drunk every weekend at our house. That was where the party was. And my dad got sober when I was 6.
Oh, wow.
But luckily he got recovery, but he also tried to commit suicide. That was his last drink, was he took a whole bottle of Valium and tried to kill himself. So that was when I was 6 years old. He ended up in Norwich State Hospital, and then luckily found his way through there to Pathfinders.
Well, which is kind of remarkable, right?
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
in
And
good old
we'll get
Manchester.
into that. Yeah.
So
How do you remember that affecting you as a 6-year-old, or do you remember it?
I remember staying at my aunt's house with my cousins for about a week. Well, that was attended to, I guess. And yeah, as a kid, you hear the whispering, you hear the conversations that you only hear parts of. You don't really know what's going on. I just knew something bad had happened, and that my dad was in trouble and things were bad. My mom was crying all the time. That kind of scenario.
Did your mom keep drinking?
No, my mom, well, she still drinks, and she did, but I think she quit for quite a while, just to support my dad and not have it in the house. But my dad actually was a beer truck driver, and he worked at Capital Liquor, delivering beer and wine and everything for 30 years. So he was always around it. He was in bars every day delivering alcohol, and he learned early on that was just part of what he did, and that, it wasn't for him. So I don't think he really had a problem with that.
Yeah. Actually, when Phil and I met, we were bartending in my early recovery, and he wasn't that far into recovery either.
I was Sam
Okay.
Malone. Do you know who Sam Malone is?
Yes, I know.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, okay, good. A lot of people don't get my references a lot of time.
Well,
Sandy and I were driving home from, I think, Rhode Island recently, and we were talking about being decades in recovery, and hard to imagine having alcohol in our lives. I mean, what it would be like. And I think we came to the conclusion that drinking for us, and we see it in many people, really complicates things and makes it really difficult because we have enough to deal with. And I think people think that, well, I've had a hard day, alcohol will relieve the stress, and maybe it does for some people. It never worked that way for me. And I think you kind of saw it. You lived it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was supposed to be fun, you know. That was, you know, it always started off as a party and fun, but never ended up that way. It was always screaming and crying and holes in the wall and things like that. So it was.
How did you cope?
So I think I coped by trying to be very controlling and, you know, control my world. And I was also, I feel like I was the adult in the house sometimes. You know, I had to kind of take over and be the grown-up and make sure my sister was okay and, you know, get breakfast for us and things like that. Well, the chaos, you know, just let the chaos kind of blow by.
it's a pretty young age to have that role.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Dad ended up at Pathfinders pursuing recovery, which is the recovery clubhouse in Manchester, Connecticut, of where we now have our Manchester Recovery Community Center, but we'll get there. So what, did things change in your home afterwards?
Yeah, things changed. So my grandparents weren't, you know, invited over for parties anymore, which kind of caused a little bit of a, I mean, I think there was a few years where it was difficult, the relationship, but you were asking, you were asking about how I knew my grandparents were alcoholics. Well, a couple years later, my grandfather tried to quit drinking, and I watched him experience DTs, and he ended up having to be admitted to the hospital to withdraw from alcohol and all that stuff. But yeah, I watched him think there were spiders all over the walls and my grandmother crying and all that stuff. So it's, yeah, we have, like I said, it really had a very big impact on our family and throughout my whole childhood. Even after my dad got sober, there was my grandparents and their chaos. So trying to deal with that.
Keep going. Keep telling your story.
Yeah. So, so things changed, but not, you know, like I said, there was still chaos. Excuse me. So, okay.
Okay, so we're in your home, and your dad's in recovery. What was it like as a teenager for you?
So I immediately, the second I had a chance, I started self-medicating, just like I had saw, you know, all the adults in my life do. So by the time I was 13, I was in my parents' medicine cabinet, stealing their Valiums, and I was smoking cigarettes, and I had my first drink at a neighbor's party that their parents were gone for the week, and had a quart of Colt 45.
Wow.
Yep. And that just set the ball rolling. And
do you remember when you took those and the feeling? What was like your internal response?
Well, I remember the drinking the most. Yeah. So I remember just feeling like a big, just that sense of, now I understand.
Yeah.
Now I know why they drink. And this is what I want to do forever. And I want to do it as much as possible.
It was like, it was this, I want to do it forever. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I really I feel some people talk about they had periods of time where they were able to drink socially or where it really wasn't the center stage in their life. That never happened for me. It was always first and foremost, it was what I wanted to do. I kind of got through the rest of the week or whatever, the days leading up to when I could drink and use. So that was immediate, and I immediately got into smoking pot because at 13 it's a lot easier to get street drugs than it is to get alcohol.
Yeah.
So smoked a lot of pot, did acid, did whatever they handed me. I was kind of like the tester. I was the youngest of the gang in our neighborhood, so I would try it. I was a garbage can. I would just take whatever you gave me and give it a try. I wasn't picky. So I mean, the very first time I drank, I threw up. I got sick. I went into a blackout. I woke up, got in trouble with my parents. All those things. I had consequences right away, first time, but I couldn't wait to do it again. None of those consequences mattered in the scheme of things. What I got from alcohol and drugs far outweighed the consequences.
It's funny to me, you talk about trying to control your environment and being bossy or, like you said, Cindy, leadership qualities, yet you wanted to take these substances that just made you lose all control.
Yeah, go figure.
Well, I understand that. It is exhausting trying to control the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think when we were off tape, we talked a little bit about codependency. And I think I developed a really strong codependent role early on where I was taking care of other people in my family and trying to control my emotions all the time, that it wasn't okay not to be okay. So, it was a lot of pressure to be in control and be okay all the time.
Talk about your neighborhood gang. I find that fascinating. Who made up this gang?
Oh, boy. So there was like 8 or 9 of us that were we grew up, it was houses, but it was slab, on a slab. They were like 800 square foot houses. They were not, it wasn't a posh neighborhood, let's put it that way. And there was a lot of dysfunction in our neighborhood. I think now the things that went on in our neighborhood, DCF would have been called, the police would have been called. Things would not have been allowed to happen the way they did if it were this time and place. But there was a group of us that were, sort of negative and, self-medicating, wanted to, my next door neighbor was selling and distributing pot. And he had, he was a couple years older than all of us, so he was the one that got the kegs. And, we would go to the meadows and we would go to Old Maids Lane in Glastonbury and have keg parties in the middle of the woods. And just, it was, we'd leave school, we'd meet at the bus stop, smoke pot, get to school, get off the bus, and then go in the woods and spend the day in the woods drinking grain punch and, smoking pot and all those things. And
are you still in touch with any of those of the old gang? Do you know what happened or where
I'm on
they are?
Facebook with some of them, but
really?
A lot of them died. A lot of them really had bad endings. A lot of them, some of them stopped on their own, stopped using and drinking. Most of them actually were able to stop because we were all really out of control. There was no social drinking going on in my circle. So a lot of them, when they got married or grew, got full-time jobs and things like that, they just stopped. And, if they go to a wedding or if they go to a 4th of July party or something, they go crazy, but they're able to control when they drink and use.
Yeah, that's not me.
That's not me either. That was not my experience.
Yeah,
and
no.
Lord knows I tried. But
I don't think I want to even consider that thought again.
Yeah. So I do see them here and there on Facebook, and I know that most of them somehow, have straightened out, and the ones that didn't aren't with us anymore.
Yeah. What kind of student were you in high school?
So I was really good. I was a good student up until I started using, and then my freshman year, I basically spent more time in the woods than I did in school or in the girls' bathroom. And so by halfway through my freshman year, I was all D's and F's on my report card. The school was calling my parents in all the time saying I wasn't going to school. I was running away from home. Because I needed to drink and use, and I was grounded all the time because I was in trouble. And so my parents decided that I needed to go to see a drug and alcohol counselor, and I needed to go to the young people's AA meeting every week in Manchester at the Pathfinders Club. So I went and saw Smokey the cab driver was my counselor.
What?
Yeah.
And for a couple of years, I went to see him every week in Rockville Hospital. He had an office. And I went to the young people's meeting. My mom would drop me off and pick me up at the young people's meeting every Wednesday night. And in my head, I always knew that it was their problem, not mine, and that if they would just let me drink and use on the weekends and on off hours, then I wouldn't have to do it during school hours. So it was really their fault that I was not doing well in school, because I had to do it during school hours when I had the freedom. So in my mind, everything was about everybody else. I never accepted responsibility for my using or that I had a problem. It was the solution. Drinking and using was always the answer to my problems, not the problem.
What years were you seeing Smokey the cab driver? Were you ever able to put any dates of the years?
In the 80s. I don't want people to be calculating my age, but
no. So
I'm 53, so
Smokey the cab driver was my sponsor in 88, 89, 90.
Okay.
And I was actually a volunteer in his office at Rockville General Hospital then.
Okay.
And he also had a piece of our wedding.
Yeah?
I forget what it was, but he did something for our
wedding.
wedding.
He read something at our wedding
something.
like that. Didn't he read the prayer or something? Maybe?
The promises.
So Smokey has a big part in my life too, and actually that's where I first heard about an emergency department recovery coach program, because that's where he handed me the beeper and said, answer this when it goes off.
Wow.
And it was Rockville General Hospital emergency department saying, we have a live one, could you come down?
That's amazing.
So I wonder if our paths even crossed in his office. Who knows?
They might have.
I was hanging there for a while. Do you ever remember anything he talked to you about? Any of his witticisms?
I can't spit out phrases, but I just know that he did change me in ways, because he was the first adult that ever looked at me and saw me as a person. And I know he cared about me. And that, he exuded that sort of just that kindness and that warmth about him. And I always felt I felt special, and I felt seen by him. So, and I know that with me, I think he tried harm reduction. Back in the day, they didn't even have a word for that.
Yeah.
But I really do think he tried to meet me where I was at. And he knew that at 15 years old, I wasn't ready to commit to a life of recovery. And so he tried to get me to, well, what if you just smoked pot on the weekends? And what if you just did that? He really tried to work with me and meet me where I was. So he had a big impact on me.
It sounds like you were tough, though. You were tough.
I was.
Yeah.
I was. I wasn't having it. I mean... But what ended up happening, and this is why, I'm so glad we have a young people and families program at CCAR, because the experience as a young person trying to find recovery is so different when I came back when I was 29 years old and got recovery. The things I needed were different. I really felt like the social connection was the most important thing. And that's basically what happened to me in high school. When I was a sophomore in high school, I made a group of friends at the young people's meeting, and I got a boyfriend, and they became my gang. They replaced that neighborhood group that I had been using with, and they gave me purpose, and I found that adrenaline rush that I needed. We went to the dances, all the AA dances that they used to have in New Britain and different West Hartford, different places like that, and that was so important to my recovery. We used to go to friendlies after every meeting and talk and laugh and have fun and be goofy, and those were the things that kept me in recovery. And I call it recovery, but I had reservations always, so I call it. I was in recovery, but I always had reservations, and I do think when I got a chance, I would smoke pot here and there, and so it was, it wasn't total abstinence. Let's put it that way. And I always knew that I wasn't done. There was always a part of me that, this is good for now, and it's going to get me through high school, and I'm going to do what I need to do. And I was able to have some fun with it and enjoy those years.
You say so much, it just makes my head spin. But it's I love what you talked about the connection. I mean, you had connections in the gang, but this became your new gang. You said that beautifully. And I think that's really what recovery is about, is connection, right?
Yes.
And I saw Sandy kind of nod about the friendlies, because we spent how many evenings in friendlies?
Down the street from the hospital, Rockville Hospital.
Exactly.
Go to a meeting and then go for coffee or ice cream afterwards.
Yeah. Our paths they must have crossed
We
at
must have been in
different
the
times.
booth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly still can't imagine that I went out at night for something at 8 o'clock.
I think about that now too, and it's like, well, some of those meetings didn't even start till 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
We didn't get out till 9:30.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
And then
crazy.
you'd go for coffee. But
And so you had this little period. Talk to us about what happened.
So when I left to go to college, and I graduated high school and left to go to college, and I broke up with the boyfriend real early once I got to college, and kind of shed my connections, really.
Right.
And by the time, I think the end of October, so we went to school probably at the end of August, and by the end of October, I drank again. And that was the first time I had drank in probably almost 4 years. So that I again got drunk, blacked out, woke up in a car the next day with a boy I didn't know, and had a hangover and went back to my room, and people were like, "Do you know what you did?" and all of that stuff, and so there were consequences immediately, but again, that was awesome. I can't wait to do it again. The consequences never outweighed the benefits that I got from just that. My head got quiet, and I thought I was okay. I could say anything. I could talk to people. I could dance. I could just be free of the voices and the noise in my head, I guess.
yes, I relate to that very much. I have the more people that are close to me in my house, the more voices in my head. And definitely alcohol used to quiet them all down.
Yeah. And I think, I think that codependency, whatever you want to call it, but I had that. I really wanted people to like me, and I wanted to be what you wanted me to be. And so it was never, what do I want to be and who do I want to be? And all those leadership skills and opinions that I had as a young child, I just swallowed, and I didn't let myself be my authentic self. I transferred to UConn, and my first semester there, I almost flunked out. I got like a 1.9 or something and got put on academic probation, because UConn is a little bit more academically challenging than Eastern. And I was I had found cocaine in that time, and I was doing a lot of cocaine, and I just couldn't go to class. I couldn't get up. I couldn't show up for class. I wasn't functioning very well. So, but that was a wake-up call after my first semester, getting put on academic probation. And the rest of the time there, I really buckled down, and I did very well. And
What were you studying?
Well, I didn't know what I wanted to be or I didn't know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
So I just did a Bachelor of Arts, and my major was English. I was an English major. So that was what I graduated with.
So I think I work with students in recovery at UConn today, and a lot of times we hear from alum from all different schools that just say, if only there had been a collegiate recovery program when I was in school.
Yeah.
And I wonder, because you'd had that young people's background, had there been one, had you known about it, what would your experience have been like?
Yeah, it's funny. There was a person in my dorm that, when I was at Eastern, that was also in recovery,
Mm-hmm.
and he ended up imploding. He was an older student that he came back to school, and he really, same thing. Neither one of us had support, so we ended up drinking together and talking about our time in recovery, and we really should get back to meetings and this and that, but there was no support. There were no on-campus meetings. Neither one of us had a car. How were we to get recovery at that time? So I think it's awesome that there's the collegiate recovery. I have a friend of mine that got sober at 19, and she went to Rutgers, and back then they were one of the first to have sober dorms.
An amazing program.
Yeah, so she had a completely different experience than I did because of that.
Yeah.
So I do think that the work you're doing is awesome and much needed.
So are we getting near the end of your use, or?
So that went on. I used for 12 years, and once I started again, and I didn't get recovery until I was 29.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm coming up next week. Will be my 23rd on May 26th, my 23rd year of
Next
recovery.
Week. Cool.
So
Congratulations.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been now in recovery longer than I was out there using, which is kind of a weird feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I did get recovery finally, and it was one of the main reasons why was because I became suicidal. I couldn't stop, and I knew I couldn't stop, and it was, I was hopeless. I had tried AA. AA didn't work, right? I had AA when I was in high school. You guys were all hypocrites, and it didn't work, and everybody was old, and my brain would not allow me to consider Alcoholics Anonymous as an option for recovery, and I didn't know about any other pathways.
Were you working or at the time, or what were you doing?
Yep, I was working. I worked at Ames corporate office in
And
Rocky
so
Hill.
you were functioning.
Barely. I ended up
Barely.
I ended up leaving Ames, and I really hit. My bottom was like 9 months after I left Ames. Because I was having anxiety and panic attacks at work. I couldn't control when I drank anymore. I used to be able to keep it just to weekends. I couldn't, on Wednesday or Thursday I was going out after work, and then I wasn't making it to work because once I started, there was the compulsion and the obsession took over and the craving, and I couldn't stop. There was nothing until I was physically separated. The bar closed. I ran out of money. I ran out of booze. Whatever. That was what separated me from my alcohol. I would keep going, and I was doing a lot of cocaine along with drinking. That was the concoction that really worked for me. So I'd be up for 2 days. I wasn't going to work. So before they fired me, I gave my notice, and people always laugh at me when I say this, but I thought to myself, I'm going to quit because it's too stressful there. And once I get the stress out of my life, I'll be able to stop drinking. And then once I stopped working, I kept drinking, and I said, well, maybe it's because I've always tried to control it. So I'm just going to have fun for a couple weeks, and I'm going to drink the way I want to drink, and then I'll be able to stop. So I always had a solution. They talk about, we tried beer, we tried wine, we tried this, so I always had a new gimmick I was trying. So I thought, I'll just drink the way I want to drink. And that turned quickly into, I became a daily drinker, and couldn't stop. And I got hopeless really, really fast. And so those 9 months were a horror show. And I went to some meetings in between, you know, when I'd wake up and I'd be just full of self-loathing and hating myself and saying, today I'm gonna stop, it's gonna be the day. But I could never ask for help when I went to a meeting. I'd walk into a meeting, sit in the back, and I'd leave halfway through because I was in so much pain, but I couldn't ask for help. I couldn't say, I'm not okay. And I don't know if anybody ever came up to me and asked me if I needed help. I don't remember anybody doing that, but that might have changed things, but I couldn't reach out and ask for help. So anyways, I ended up, I was living out of my car with a garbage bag full of clothes and couch surfing, and my parents just couldn't, my mother especially couldn't deal with me with that. Like, she had already, you know, lived with her dad and with my grandparents and with my dad, and she just couldn't do it again. And, you know, I feel so bad when I think about my mom and everything, that her life has been just bombarded by alcoholism. And so I thought I was going to kill myself. That was the only thing I could come up with, was I just got to die. And so that was what really got me into recovery, was I can't kill myself because it's going to kill my mother. I just can't. And so that was what really pushed me into I ended up going to High Watch. And that wasn't my last drink. I had 5 months of recovery, and I drank again. And for 3 months, I was drinking in between going to meetings. And in the meantime, I moved to California.
Geographical cure.
Yeah. And I was in California for the first 10 years of my recovery, actually. But I had moved to California and was drinking, and I came back home to get my car and have it shipped out there. And when I was home, I went out and got drunk, and on the way home I hit something, and I was in a blackout. And to this day, I still don't know what I hit, and if it was a garbage can, a person, an animal, I don't know what I hit, which scared the crap out of me. And it basically gave me it made me understand that my alcoholism is not my problem. It's everybody's problem. When I pick up a drink, I'm a lethal weapon. And I don't know what I'm going to do. And I don't know who I'm going to hurt, and I don't know where I'm going to end up. And so I finally got that. And that took me a long time, and a lot of consequences and a lot of bad things happening. For whatever reason, that car accident is what turned that light bulb on, and I really got that it's not okay for me to be out drinking, because I'm going to kill somebody. And it's probably not going to be me. It's going to be someone who doesn't deserve to have that happen to them.
What are you doing in California? Well, where did that come from? All of a sudden you're in California, 10 years, first 10 years in California.
So my the bottom was I couldn't get a job. I showed up for interviews drunk, and I couldn't. I was living out of my car, and I got a call from someone that I used to work with at Ames, who had left and moved to Florida and was with a consulting company. And she called me and asked me if I wanted to take this job in California. And at that time, she didn't know that I had hit bottom or that I had a problem, because she had left a few years before it got really bad. So I said, of course I do, because I thought that would be the perfect solution. But when so this is another strange thing that happened to me that maybe I've heard other people say this too, but my higher power talked to me. I heard a voice in my head. I was getting ready to go to California. My higher power, a very gentle voice in my head that was not mine, said, "You're really sick, and you need help." And I was crying. You need help, and you have to get help, and you're going to die if you go to California. and you're going to end up living under a bridge because there's nobody out there. You don't know a living soul out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I, once that happened, I became willing. That was my moment where I became willing to do something. And I cried, and I cried for like 2 days because all of a sudden the dam opened, and I got this willingness, and I knew that I needed to do something.
Spiritual awakening.
Yeah, I had the burning bush. And so that was when I called and got a bed at High Watch, and I went to High Watch for 2 weeks, and I went to California 6 days after I left High Watch. And they paid all my expenses, and it was during the .com era, and I worked at a software company, a startup, and they were dying for people at that time, and so they were paying me tons of money, and they gave me a corporate apartment, they gave me a car, they paid all my meals for about a year, and then then I finally was stable enough, and I got my own apartment, and but still worked for I worked for a startup and then a big software company for 10 years, and I did very well, and I got to travel all around the country, and I was a consultant, implementation consultant, so I traveled all around the country. I got to go to Hawaii, got to go to the UK, I got to go to projects all over the place, and I went to my pathways, the 12 steps. I did go back to AA, and it did save my life. And I went to AA meetings all over the world, and I got to see how recovery was done all over the place, and it was amazing. I had a really awesome first 10 years of my recovery. And then I ended up moving back to Connecticut because I decided I wanted to have children. It was my heart's desire to have children. And I wasn't married, and I had no prospects in sight. And someone said to me, if it's that important to you, then do it. Have a child, have a family. You don't need a husband. And so I ended up, my son, he's going to be 13. I cry when I talk about that too. I went to a sperm bank, and we have beeping. I went to a sperm bank, and I was inseminated, and I got pregnant the very first time, which they say there's only a 20% chance that'll happen, but it happened, and I had my son, and I moved back home so that he would grow up with family, and so I've been here for now going on 13 years back here, and in recovery. And after a couple of years, I decided I wanted more family, and still no husband in sight. So I started fostering for Department of Children and Families, and I ended up adopting 2 little girls that were sisters. And so I have 3 children now, and I'm a single mom, and it's great. I mean, that was what I wanted. I wanted a family, and I wanted to, I wanted those things, and I made them happen.
How old are your girls? How old are
6 and 8.
6 and 8, and a 13-year-old.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, so things are starting to get really interesting. Yeah.
And I'm a little familiar with what the whole foster care process is. So you were able to go through a lot navigating all of that.
Yeah. I had each girl was with me for 2 years as a foster before the mom's rights were terminated and the actual adoption could take place. So there was a lot of hoops and compliance and training and court and all kinds of things that had to happen for that to take place.
And what were you doing for income and work when you moved back to Connecticut?
I was able to transfer back I was working at a major software company. And then I got laid off during the recession in 2008 when my son was 9 months old. And took me a little over a year to find another job, but I luckily had stock options and savings and stuff that I could, and I was on unemployment, and so I was okay, but it was getting to the point where I was not going to be okay. And I got a job with the state of Connecticut working for the Board of Regents for Higher Education. I was with CTDLC, which is the Connecticut Distance Learning Consortium. And so I worked there for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's your family, the rest of your extended family and all that? Are they in your kids' lives, and are you all...
I have my sister, and she has 2 daughters, and they're very close with my kids. They live in Glastonbury, and so do I. And then my mom is in East Hartford. My dad passed away 3 years ago.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. So my mom is still in East Hartford. So that's the core family that are still very involved in my life, and I'm involved in theirs. So we support each other.
Did your mom ever get into recovery for herself, either as a family member or?
No, when my dad first got sober, she went to Al-Anon for a little while, but neither of them stayed with the 12-step program. They went for a while and then they stopped. So she learned some basic principles, but no, she never really got into a long-term recovery.
But it must have been, what were her feelings about seeing you get into long-term recovery and then build this family? Must have helped heal some of her wounds from all that she'd experienced.
I hope so. I think she loves being a grandmother, and she loves that experience, and I think she loves that I'm in recovery and that she can trust me, and that I'm authentic now. I talked about that at the beginning. I think I've spent the last 23 years becoming who I am and becoming who God always intended me to be. I'm that person now, and I'm not afraid to be quirky. I'm a single mom with 3 kids, and I live in Glastonbury where everybody has a white picket fence and a Suburban, and I don't really fit in, but I don't care. I'm okay with that now. I'm okay with being who I am and being I foster animals. That was one of my pathways that I used when I was in recovery out in California. I did a lot of animal rescue and was on the board and vice president of an animal rescue, and I continue to foster and be involved in animal rescue. So that's near and dear to my heart, and that's not something that everybody understands or gets. And even my own family, they're like, why do you have to have pregnant cats and kittens all over the house and this and that? And it's like it brings me joy, and it makes me happy, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something in this world to make it a better place. So that's what I do. And you can have an opinion, but you don't need to share it. Yeah. That's one of my favorite lines.
Well, pet therapy is a very treasured activity at UConn's campus. So, I think it is one of those pathways, right? It's one of the many things that brings peace and comfort.
Yeah, and I mean, I've even talked to Rebecca Allen, who's my boss, about doing fostering at the center, if we can, navigate that and having that be sort of pet therapy in reverse. That we think of, we're rescuing animals and helping them, but they're really helping us in so many ways, therapeutically, and it could be a win-win. So I think about that too. I wanna share that pathway, I guess, if I can.
Yeah.
It's funny how that works. So I'm curious, you built a whole recovery community, I'm assuming, when you were in California, right?
I did.
A network of people and support. And then you decided to move to Connecticut, and it seems like you made that transition easily, but was it? And what? Because you had to kind of like restart your recovery in a lot of ways and make new connections. And what was that process like? And what does your recovery gang look like today?
So that was really hard. I've definitely struggled in my recovery since I moved back to Connecticut with connection. And I still have a really close connection with the people in California, thank God. But because I was a single mom, too, it was really difficult to get to meetings physically. So early on, I found in the rooms, and I found some online meetings, and I did that. But it is hard to make one-on-one individualized connections. So I did struggle. And, I really hit bottom in my recovery when I was 18 years sober. I had stopped going to meetings altogether, and I wasn't praying. I wasn't in touch with my higher power. I wasn't doing the things that I had always done to keep me on a path that I wanted to be on and to keep me spiritually in sync. I had to stop fostering for a while too, because I had these 3 kids and they were babies, and I just couldn't. So my whole life really was around being a mom and going to work, and so I got into a relationship that turned out to be really toxic, and I hit bottom, and I had a thought one day that I can either drink or I can kill myself. Oof. And that woke me up. It was like, wait a minute, where did that thought come from, and how can I get it out of my head, because that was not okay.
Right.
I just knew that was not okay. So I ended up I took some time off from work, a couple weeks, and I went to, what's it called? Communities, not CHR, the one in East Hartford.
Intercommunity?
Intercommunity.
Yeah.
I went there and I said, I'm afraid I'm going to do something to hurt myself if I need help. And they helped me. And They got me on antidepressants, and they got me a psychiatrist, and they got me a counselor, and I started going back to meetings, and I've kind of slowly rebuilt my life. And and my gang now is, I'm old now. I aged in recovery, and so I don't need the adrenaline rush and I don't need the posse so much, but I do need a few people that I'm connected to, and I have those people in my life, and we support each other, and I call them, and I'm still active in Alcoholics Anonymous, so I sponsor women, and they sponsor me right back. It's that kind of a relationship, and being at CCAR at the center, I've made some really close friends within CCAR, within the staff, and also just some of the volunteers that come through there are, they have a lot to teach me, and we support each other in a lot of ways. So
how'd you find CCAR?
So the counselor that I was seeing when my life fell apart, we used to talk about I really would like to do something more. I want to give back, and I want to sort of explore other ways that I can give back. And I used to talk about, AA is great, except when you're homeless and when you're just getting out of jail, or when I've seen so many people come to Alcoholics Anonymous and need so much more than AA is designed for. And I would say to him, I want to start a company or do something to help those people. And he said to me, you should be a recovery coach. I had no idea what he was talking about. And he told me about CCAR, and he told me about recovery coaching, and he actually gave me Jim Higgins' phone number. And I called and talked to him, and he told me about CCAR and the Recovery Coach Academy. And I showed up one morning at the Recovery Coach Academy because I hadn't the window closed to enroll, and Phil was happened to be standing at the desk when I walked in, and I said, I wasn't able to register, but I really need to go to this class. Can I get in? And Shanae was there, and you were standing there, and you turned to me and you said yes. And you looked at Shanae and nodded and said yes, she can attend. And for whatever reason, I don't know if you just read my face or knew that I just needed to be there.
You can be pretty convincing when you want to be.
I guess. Yeah, those leadership skills.
I didn't know I had a choice. I didn't think I could say no at the time. No.
Yeah, it's part of your culture at CCAR is to err on the side of generosity.
Right.
So you did that day. If you had sent me away, I don't know what I would have done, but you didn't.
No.
I got to come through the academy, and then...
What was your experience like coming from a pretty strong 12-step background and experience in the academy that week?
It was mind-blowing, very expanding to my perceptions.
In a good way, I hope.
In a very good way.
Okay.
But at the same time, I had to really rethink, what my idea of what is recovery, what recovery looks like is, because there's a lot of sort of black and white thinking, I think, that I was exposed to in some of the AA communities that I was in, and I thought that there was a certain way to do it, and that, if you weren't doing it that way, then you weren't in recovery. And so I had to really expand my definition of what recovery was and what it was going to look like for me. Because along the way, when I looked back, I went to therapy. I had, I took antidepressants when I needed them. I did a lot of self-help, extracurricular type work. I did a lot of, things that supported my recovery. It wasn't all one pathway. So I got to look at that in hindsight and say, I've been doing this all along, but I didn't put a label on it. So once I made that connection, it was easy to accept all of the precepts that CCAR talks about in recovery coaching.
Yeah, I think sometimes, whether it's the individual or the phase we are in our recovery, sometimes we need a box, sometimes we need guardrails, sometimes we just need bumpers.
Exactly.
So I think having multiple pathways of recovery allows us to get seek what we need at the time.
That was pretty cool, Sandy.
I know.
love
I was
that.
kind of amazed that popped into my head myself.
The next thing I was going to say, though, is I like open fields or open seas.
You need bumpers.
No boundaries.
Bumpers.
To boldly go
Bumpers.
where no man has gone before.
So, Cathy, I know that you gave a lot of thought about talking with us today, and I just want to make sure you have a chance. Have you been able to share some of the things that you hope to share?
Yeah, just looking at my notes. Yeah, I think I did. And just to kind of add on to what you said, I think what my message that I really wanted to have today was that recovery is always, it's ever changing. The pathway I needed those first few years is very different than my recovery that I need and get fed from today. And that's been my path. And the longer I've been in recovery and become more of my authentic self, I've expanded sort of who I am and what I do and how I give back and how I nurture myself. So I think that's kind of my main thing that came out of the writing and the thinking that I did before I came here today was, recovery allows me to be who I am and not apologize to anybody for it. I may not be the white picket fence kind of girl, but I'm happy with who I am and the person that I've become and the way I'm living my life. So,
well, we're very happy that you are a manager of one of our recovery community centers. I'm sure you see all kinds of people come into the center, and you navigated an unprecedented year. I think you had started a few months prior, and then all of a sudden, we're shutting down because of the COVID pandemic and trying to go virtually and juggling work, family, and recovery, and like we all are. What are some of the takeaways from your time as being a recovery community center manager?
Yeah, like you said, it's been a very tumultuous time. I started, my first day at CCAR was August 26th, and the center actually opened in late October, and then by March we were
you did
shutting
so much
down.
work to get that ready, too. It was really remarkable what you did.
Yeah, so there was a lot that went into it. And, but yeah, so I guess what I've learned more than anything is that where there's a will, there's a way. I feel really proud about how CCAR was able to navigate the pandemic and still provide support and services to all the people that needed it. We had a list of volunteers and people who would come to the center that we called every week, and that was just part of what we did, and text them, and whether they reached back or not, because a big percentage of them didn't. It didn't matter. It was, we're going to let them know that recovery is here when they need it, and if they need someone, they're going to have a text from me. They're going to have a message from me. They're going to know that, and so I think that was a big part of it, was just trying to let people know that the connection is there and that the help is there. The encouragement, whatever they needed was there if and when they wanted it or needed it. And some people, we're really good at thriving in isolation. And when I say thriving, I say that I don't mean it. The addict thrives in isolation. And so we lost a lot of people, that had been really committed to their recovery and committed to volunteering and things like that. But we're rebuilding, these last few months with people getting vaccinated and restrictions being lifted. We're rebuilding, and more people are coming back that have been out or been hiding out in their houses and not reaching back. They're starting to reach back, but we're also getting a lot of new people and a lot of excitement and a lot of just. I'm just thrilled with where we're going right now, because all kinds of stuff is opening up, and I'm back out doing outreach and downtown Manchester. I'm meeting with the special services manager this week to talk about how can we be involved in the things that are happening in downtown Manchester. And I just want people to know that hope is, there's hope and that recovery is possible. So I'm excited.
Yeah,
It's gonna be good.
Cathy, I'm a little over-enthusiastic about a quote that I heard yesterday that I think sums up everything you've shared, and particularly the spirit of CCAR in our recovery community centers. Listen to me say our. I actually don't work for CCAR. I'm just a volunteer, but still mine too. But I think this exemplifies all of it, and this was something somebody heard at their very first recovery meeting, and it was, "You are needed, wanted, and loved in the exact shape and condition you arrive." And I think that's the message of the recovery community centers, and I'm so glad you're there in Manchester. I was hoping for one for a long time, and I appreciate everything you've shared with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cathy.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And you gave me such a wonderful thing to focus on, the shirt, that very loud shirt.
The bananas.
Of course.
All those bananas.
All those bananas. Thanks, Cathy.
You're welcome.